An increasing number of Americans are relying on social assistance in order to pay their basic expenses and as their primary source of income in order to get by. As of February of this year, an estimated 68 million Americans relied on Social Security benefits, and it is also estimated by the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities that Social Security is the largest government anti-poverty program, lifting an estimated 27.6 million people out of poverty as of 2023. Meanwhile, a 2024 survey published by the American Psychological Association found that the majority of Americans believe that their societal divisions with their neighbors and friends is a major source of stress in their life today. For my friend Clarence Henry Carter, he's the commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Human Services. He's dedicated the last 3 decades of his life to serving economically, socially, and developmentally vulnerable Americans. He served in the administration of 2 presidents, 4 governors, and a mayor in this very capacity. As commissioner, Carter oversees a budget of more than $3 billion, serving vulnerable Americans across all 95 counties in Tennessee. Carter works to help us all understand and rethink the way we view government assistance. He's played a significant role in reshaping D.C.'s homeless shelter system to focus on permanent housing initiatives. He's administered the $16.5 billion of federal money designated for the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. He takes pride in consistently pushing past band-aid solutions in favor of permanent and lasting change. And Carter joined me this week to have an in-depth discussion on how government assistance programs can run more efficiently, how we elevate people out of the cycle of poverty in America, and the role we can all play in helping our friends and neighbors when they're in need. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Commissioner, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited to learn about your more than 3 decades in human services, my friend. Happy Friday to you, and thank you so very much for being here.
Well, Kevin, thanks so much for the opportunity, and I'm appreciative of the chance to meet you and your audience.
Absolutely. Now, Commissioner Carter, I know that you spent nearly 3 decades in the field of human services, and you've dedicated your career to helping vulnerable Americans get sort of a advanced quality of life, my friend. So I'm wondering if you can start by telling me about your experience, why you're passionate about helping vulnerable Americans, and your current assessment on how human services and assisting vulnerable Americans is going in America abroad. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
So So Kevin, I have always had a soft spot for those in our society that were in some way more vulnerable, and had the blessing and good fortune of being able to make a career out of the making the systems, the public systems that were intended to serve individuals and families that are vulnerable, to help lift them beyond that vulnerability, and have been blessed, as I said, to make a more than 30-year career in it, and in that have served in the administration of 2 presidents, 4 governors, and a mayor, and have gotten to intimately understand the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the massive system that we have built up in America that's dedicated to serving that vulnerability. And the book that I've just written that's been recently released, it delves into what's right and what's wrong with that system of investments that we've made and a vision to transform it. Okay, the basis of the book and the vision is that our nation is the most generous nation known to humankind. America writ large would give one the shirt off its back. Okay, and we showcase that in the first chapter of the book by talking about America's pattern of giving, foreign aid, our charitable giving, and the giving that we do in this realm of vulnerability. And so our basic premise is, it is not that we don't care enough. It is not that we don't give enough. It is that the systems that we have built are dysfunctional by design and execution. So that we then, go on to lay out that dysfunction of design and say that we can do better and propose a vision for doing so.
So let's talk about the vision for doing so, my friend. Certainly under the current administration, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives aren't at the top of the totem pole, so to speak, but I know it's still important for you to. Commissioner, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn about your more than 3 decades in human services, my friend. Happy Friday to you, and thank you so very much for being here.
Well, Kevin, thanks so much for the opportunity, and I'm appreciative of the chance to meet you and your audience.
Absolutely. Now, Commissioner Carter, I know that you spent nearly 3 decades in the field of human services, and you've dedicated your career to helping vulnerable Americans get sort of a advanced quality of life, my friend. So I'm wondering if you can start by telling me about your experience, why you're passionate about helping vulnerable Americans, and your current assessment on how human services and assisting vulnerable Americans is going in America abroad. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
So Kevin, I have always had a soft spot for those in our society that were in some way more vulnerable, and had the blessing and good fortune of being able to make a career out of the making the systems, the public systems that were intended to serve individuals and families that are vulnerable, to help lift them beyond that vulnerability. And have been blessed, as I said, to make a more than 30-year career in it. And in that have served in the administration of 2 presidents, 4 governors, and a mayor, and have gotten to intimately understand the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the massive system that we have built up in America that's dedicated to serving that vulnerability. And the book that I've just written that's been recently released, it delves into what's right and what's wrong with that system of investments that we've made and a vision to transform it. Okay, the basis of the book and the vision is that our nation is the most generous nation known to humankind. America writ large would give one the shirt off its back. Okay, and we showcase that in the first chapter of the book by talking about America's pattern of giving, foreign aid, our charitable giving, and the giving that we do in this realm of vulnerability. And so our basic premise is, it is not that we don't care enough. It is not that we don't give enough. It is that the systems that we have built are dysfunctional by design and execution. So that we then, go on to lay out that dysfunction of design and say that we can do better and propose a vision for doing so.
So let's talk about the vision for doing so, my friend. Certainly under the current administration, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives aren't at the top of the totem pole, so to speak. But I know it's still important for you to top of the totem pole, so to speak. But I know it's still important for you to give vulnerable Americans a vision of prosperity, and I know the book that you've just written dives into how to do that, my friend. So, Bronwyn, tell me about writing the book and why and how we can give vulnerable Americans a realistic shot at prosperity. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
So Kevin, it begins with a different intention. And let me explain, okay? The current intention of our system of public support, and we call that the safety net, it is to provide benefits, goods, and services to individuals, families, and communities when they exhibit some degree of vulnerability for which they meet the eligibility criterion for those benefits, goods, and services. Okay. The intention of the system is not to solve those problems. It is, quite frankly, to put Band-Aids on them. And it's our basic argument that our intention should be to help them solve that problem. Okay, and so instead of, and I will let me choose a particular program that, quite frankly, has been very much in the news because of the government shutdown that happened in the beginning of October. We'll take the SNAP program, more formally known as the food stamp program. Okay? Mm-hmm. I have administered that program at the federal, state, and local levels of government. The three things that we hold the administrators of the program accountable for are: did you get the benefit to the individual or family that was entitled to receive it? Did you get it to them in the right amount? And did you get it to them in the right time frame? Because circumstances demand some urgency. Okay? If you do those three things well, you have run a great food stamp program. Nothing that we are held accountable to speaks to whether or not we helped that consumer grow beyond the need for the SNAP benefit. So therefore, as long as that consumer meets the eligibility criterion, they will receive that benefit. In our vision, with a changed intention, we continue to provide the benefit, but we add to it, what are we doing to help that consumer not need that benefit maybe tomorrow or next month or next year? We call it growing capacity to reduce dependency. So we begin with a very different intention. Okay. Part two of our vision, after we've changed the intention, then we say we have to change the architecture of the system that serves those vulnerable individuals or families. And what I mean by that, Kevin, there are currently 114 federally authorized means-tested programs. In other words, our federal government has designed and implemented 114 different programs that speak to every aspect of the human condition. The challenge is that each one of those programs has been built singularly, as if somehow that's the single bullet to human well-being. The programs were not designed to work in conjunction with each other. Some of the programs actually work at cross purposes with others. Okay? And so it is our argument that if we have this new intention, this new shared vision, then what we have to do next is we have to ensure that the architecture supports our engagement with our safety net, serve as a trampoline for the consumer that it served to catch them when they fall and lift them beyond the vulnerability that had them need those supports in the first place. So we have to have human growth outcomes, and that becomes our success. The success in a particular time frame and in the right amount, but it should be ultimately, did that help you? That intervention or a number of interventions coming together, did they help you get beyond the place where one day you could turn around and say, thanks, but no thanks, because I now got the baton of my life and I can finish running my life's race with reduced or no public intervention. So it's a different intention. It is a supportive architecture, and it is measuring what counts. That's the elements of our transform vision.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, Commissioner. I also wanted to get your take on this because, Commissioner, one of the tenets that I live my life by is that inclusion is the gateway to independence. And I'm sure that Commissioner, I was born with cerebral palsy, and one of my life's vision and life work for myself is making sure that people with disabilities can gain full access to gainful employment. And I know that providing people with a job is a gainfully important thing to do when it comes to lifting them out of poverty. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on how you would define inclusion as it relates to independence, and how we can help people with disabilities specifically find their own pathway to prosperity. What are your thoughts there, Commissioner?
So Kevin, it begins with whomever presents themselves as vulnerable and in need. And if you don't mind, I would take your own circumstance. Okay.
Absolutely. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. You clearly have experienced in your life that many others have not.
Mm-hmm.
And you somehow seem to have found your way to be able to make your way in the world. Okay. And my evidence of that is our discussion here today. Okay. You have apparently created a very successful podcast. Okay. That enables you to, if you would, open up your own aperture to the world and allow people to see the world from many different angles. But I would say that, okay, along the way, Kevin McShann may have needed some help, from external supports to be able to get to the place where you make your way. So the idea for me of the safety net is not to pick and choose by some kind of manufactured criterion. It is to understand that there have been in every society known to humankind, there have been individuals in that society that experience some kind of vulnerability, economic, social, or developmental, and that there has to be a system that's designed to meet those consumers where they are, understand their challenges, and be able to bring supports to help them make their way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Kevin, here's for me what's important, okay? The other thing that I see in this vision is Whitman clearly has significantly put his own effort into making his way. My argument is the system can't do it for Kevin, but the system should meet Kevin's will to do it for himself. So therefore, where you have said, I want to live the best life that I can live, and I am willing to put in the work to do that, there then must be a system of supports that meets you in that place, understands what your need is, and helps you to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Commissioner, I'm also curious to ask you about the Affordable Care Act, because it was one of the main drivers for the government shutdown. And, our friends over at PBS News Commissioner said if the Affordable Care Act premiums are allowed to expire, and in some cases they already have, the out-of-pocket premiums are estimated to increase by as much as 114%, which is an average cost to the consumer of $1,016 next year if action isn't taken on the Affordable Care Act. So I'm wondering your thoughts on those findings and how we can finally make universal health care a right for all Americans, whether be vulnerable or not. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
I am not I am not a supporter of a government run universal healthcare system. What I am supportive of, Kevin, is everyone being able to access the care that they need in order to make their lives work. I don't happen to think that a government single payer model is the way to achieve that. I am unashamedly a free market capitalist, okay? And I believe that there are ways that we can stoke the engine of capitalism to ensure that, again, every American can have access to the kinds of healthcare supports they need in order to make their lives work. Backing up to the beginning of your inquiry there, I don't believe that the government shutdown was about healthcare. Okay, I believe that it was simply a power struggle between the two dominant political parties. Okay, and in that regard, I feel like at the end of the day, when that began to harm people through things like us not being able to get out food stamp or SNAP benefits to folks, then the politics, from my perspective, became foolish. Okay, I believe that in its current incarnation, we do have to do something about the design and operation of what has been termed the Affordable Care Act. Okay, I think it has become pretty clear on its face that the Affordable Care Act is not so affordable. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to go back to the drawing board. We have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, our original intention here is to ensure that as much of our citizenry as possible has the ability to access the care that they need in order to be able to make their lives work. And how in a capitalistic society do we achieve that objective? So I do think that it's very good that we are now back at that drawing board. Okay, and I just think that we have to put our best minds together to figure out how to do that in the construct of our American society.
Yeah, so let me follow up by asking you, how do you think we can get politics out of healthcare and really just serve people and provide them with options so once they get sick, going to the doctor or the hospital won't bankrupt them? And how do we get to a place where people don't have to choose between their health care, their food, and living in a comfortable environment? So how do you think we can reform the healthcare system so that politics aren't the main driver and serving people is? What are your thoughts there?
So Kevin, I have to admit to not being a healthcare specialist. And so I would begin by saying, I don't have a good answer to the very thoughtful and important question that you just raised. But here's what I would say is, I believe that we have the ingredients in our society to answer that question. And what would be my hope is that we would use those ingredients, we would use the free market system, we would use the best minds in this society, again, around that objective, okay? Understanding that in life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness, which is what our framers intended to build a society to support, a most important part of life is health. And so in our pursuit of life, we don't have a way to ensure that folks can have health. We are not delivering on the promise, we're not fully delivering on the promise of life. Mm-hmm. So I gotta say, I'm sorry, that answer to your question is outside of my pay grade. But I do believe it is an important question that we've got to put our basic economic structure and our best minds together to try to solve the problem. And Kevin and I would say that the reason that I believe that if you put those ingredients to work, because we have seen the evolution of the American society, it has been driven by this capitalist society and brilliant minds. And when I look at some of the kinds of today's inventions, okay, that those brilliant minds have put to work, and let me take just one of those. And this is very far outside of human services, okay? Kevin, the taxi cab system, okay, for years and years and years, that system principally worked in appreciably urban areas, and supports outside of those urban areas were not as readily available. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and you could get a cab downtown any time of the day or night. But very often, that cab wouldn't, I couldn't hail a cab and go to my neighborhood in Homewood because the cab wouldn't choose to go there. But then you had, a few years ago, this amazing intervention called Uber and Lyft, which completely stood the taxi industry on its ear, okay? It now makes bazillions of taxis, and by our technology, that support is everywhere. And that was raw capitalism that saw a problem, and it descended on that problem and has completely forever transformed that system. It's that kind of, again, raw capitalism that we've got to bring to this issue of the health and well-being of our society. So I want to employ our capitalist system and turn our best minds loose on saying, how do we ensure that every American that needs help with their health has a system by which they can do it, one which doesn't bankrupt them, and also doesn't shatter the system that needs to provide that health.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it seemed like you had quite the extensive opinion, my friend, and I couldn't agree with you more. People deserve to have health care, and it needs to be an affordable, easily accessible system, and it's a conversation that needs to require many voices for sure. But I also wanted to ask you about the current state of our Social Security system, because According to the Center for American Progress, a commission of more than 7 million Americans who are 65 or older receive at least 90% of their income from Social Security. But the Center also reports that, the SSA administration recently announced more than 7 million job cuts, my friend, which is 12% of that workforce. So let's talk about Social Security, protecting it, and it's the future of the program, my friend, and whether you're concerned about the future viability of the program, not only because of the job cuts, but because of the current state of the system. What are your thoughts on Social Security, my friend?
So a couple of thoughts, Kevin, and let me begin with, I'm going to take the second part of it first, okay? Kevin, one of the things that I think one of the only positive benefits that I believe that we saw out of the COVID challenges that we had as a society is that we were able to look at the application of work differently. For my entire career, in doing the work that I do, and pretty much the rest of the world did, we had to go to one location, and you would go to that location, 40 or so hours a week in order to do your work. And that was the only place you could do the work from. When COVID hit, we were all told, pick up your laptop and go home. You're going to have to do your work in a distributed way until further notice. Well, what we learned is we didn't have to be stuck in one place to do the job. The extension of that is also our technology enables us to do a lot more with some less. And so I'm not troubled by the staff reductions, because I know that in every bureaucracy, there is a degree of extra that the work can get done without. And I don't say that as hyperbole or thought. I have seen that in the agencies that I have administered, okay? So I'm not as concerned with the staff cuts. Now let's get back to the more fundamental problem of the design of the Social Security Administration. Now let me tell you, again, this is a little bit different than the last part of our conversation. I have had to, in my days of administration, I've had some direct relationship with Social Security Administration through our work with vocational rehabilitation, which funds an awful lot of our vocational rehabilitation. What I would tell you is that our Social Security system, it was designed in a time and a place where the dynamics of our society were very different than they are today. We were a much younger society. There were many more individuals that were working and paying into the system than there were using, or if you were taking out of the system. Well, as we have aged as a society, that equation is no longer the same equation under which we design the system. And so what that tells me is we have to have the courage to think differently. Okay? Again, understanding that we still want to provide this kind of economic support for our ever graying population. But our mechanism to do so has got to be adjusted. And we have a problem in our society when we think we have to keep doing things the way that we've done them. And my argument is that the math doesn't math anymore. Mm. And so let's understand that. Let's accept that and say that our objective hasn't changed. But how we meet that objective has to change, because the math that we had many years ago when we designed this simply doesn't support the system today. So I say again, let's go back to the ingredients. Okay, let's go back to our basic capitalistic society, keeping in mind that it is our objective to ensure that our seniors who get beyond their working age years still have supports to live a life of dignity and respect until God calls them home. How do we adjust what we have to meet that objective?
Yeah, and I wanted to follow up on, because Commissioner, I truly believe that building relationships and building relationships with community organizations and political figures and those that work in nonprofit and who work in uplifting the vulnerable is very important. So I want to ask you your opinion on how we build better relationships with government, community organizations, and those that are responsible for the uplift and making sure that the uplift is sustainable. So what are your thoughts on building long-lasting relationships that really make a difference between community stakeholders and government at large? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
And Kevin, I actually speak to this in the last chapter in my book, and this is very important, okay? One of the challenges with the system of public supports that we have built is, over time, as the involvement of government has expanded, we have ended up crowding out other sectors of our society from being part of the problem solving, as if somehow the government can do this all. And so one of the things that I say in the book is that these problems are not bigger than all of us. We have to be very intentional about engaging each sector of our society, the community of faith, philanthropy, education, the private sector, the community-based organizations. We have to engage all of those sectors in this work. And so I think that we, quite frankly, have done a poor job of that. Now, I would say to you, okay, Kevin, I want to make sure that as we engage those community-based organizations, okay, and those other sectors, that all of them are engaged in the same pursuit. And what I mean by that is, I go back to the very beginning of our discussion. I think that we have to begin in our system of public supports with this different intention. And this different intention is this shared vision of wanting to create an America where individuals have the greatest amount of freedom while we protect for health, safety, and commerce. The greatest amount of freedom. So I would want every sector that we engage in this work, including our non-governmental organizations, to operate under that premise, that it is our objective to free people to act in their own best interests. We should not want a society where we make individuals wards of the public. Okay. Now, the truth is, there are going to be some individuals amongst us that are going to need external supports forever. It would be the nature of their lives. And we have to understand that, meet them where they are, and serve them. But we should never stray away from that basic principle of we want an America where everyone is free as possible to make their own version of the American dream. So if all of us are in the boat together with our oars rowing towards the same shore, we can achieve that objective. And Kevin, I am so convinced of this because, and again, we put this in the book, okay? Whenever there is tragedy or calamity in our society, everybody runs to help. Whether or not folks can bring a truck or a shovel or a sandwich or their own two hands or even a smile or a good thought, we rush to that calamity and bring our collective energy to solve. What is my hope is that we can understand that the vulnerability of our citizenry is that kind of tragedy or calamity, and that we ought to all rush to the service of that so that we can help folks grow beyond that vulnerability.
Yeah, and I'm struck listening to your comments, and I have to ask you this question because as an African American male and someone who works in helping the vulnerable sector succeed in life and living in Tennessee now as you do, America is one of the richest countries in the world. But more and more people are relying on government to get them through their basic expenses. And then the Pew Research Center released a study last year that said 55% of Americans believe that the public assistance program or aid that the government provides does more good than harm. But I'm curious to ask you about America being the richest country in the world and how we strike the balance between knowing that and helping to lift people out of poverty so that the system isn't so strained. Because America, I think, can do more, and I'm wondering your thoughts on sort of the willingness or the will, whether it be from society, politically, or just generally. Why do you think so many people are reliant upon looking to their government to help them solve their basic needs, and how we can help people really take advantage of what America has to offer?
Kevin, a couple of thoughts in that regard, as I'm sure you can, sure you'll agree. First of all, Kevin, I mentioned to you earlier in our discussion that we currently have, federal government authorizes 114 different programs. Mm-hmm. Federal government alone, we expend on an annual basis in those programs $1.49 trillion each year. Okay? My argument, and I argue this in the book, that I don't need another dollar, I don't need another program. Okay? What I need is common sense out of what we do with what we have. Okay? And I mentioned to you about beginning with a different intention. We have so many people reliant on the system because the system isn't intentional about helping them not need to rely on it. Okay? We have many people in our society that float in and out of the system of public supports, but they float in and out based on their own circumstances. Okay, the economy goes up, and they don't need it. The economy retracts, and they do need it. Okay, so there are folks that move in and out, but there's another class of folks that don't feel as if they have what it takes to move out on their own. And our system hasn't been designed intentionally to help them do so. And that is my argument, okay? If we have a different intention, if we say on the day that Clarence presents himself and says, I need help, if our intention says, okay, Clarence, you need help, all right? Let's take a full understanding of who you are and what kind of help that you need, okay? We do that sort of universal environmental scan of you. And then we work with you to build a plan that says, okay, Clarence, you've asked for help on this day. We've got taken this richer understanding of who you are, and we're going to bring together all of these supports to help. And we're going to give you somebody who can help you navigate all these supports. And we are going to measure these all along the way. And success is going to be the day that you can say, I don't need these supports anymore because I can do this on my own. So I go back to my original notion and say, for me, Kevin, this all begins with intention. Okay. Mm-hmm. Do we have the intention as a society to meet that consumer where they are, and with the intention to grow them beyond that so that they can live their best life on their own?
Yeah, absolutely. And Commissioner, I've got 3 questions left for you. And the first is a good follow-up to what you've just finished sharing with me, because, you know, according to USA Today, as of August, Commissioner, more than 8.5 million people in America held or considered to be multiple job holders. And our friends over at the Bureau of Labor and Statistics also said that between 5.2 and 5.4% of today's workforce holds multiple jobs just to cover basic expenses. So I'm wondering your thoughts on economic prosperity and how we can make sure that the middle class is risen up so that they don't have to hold multiple jobs just to cover basic expenses. And what are your thoughts also on those findings and statistics, and what do you think needs to be done to create a labor market that allows people to work one job or to have more professional flexibility, just not to cover their basic expenses? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
So Kevin, I think that most everybody that I know or met, and I want to take this in 2 different directions. The first is that we were at a time in our life, in our workplace evolution, where we were struggling to make ends meet, okay? That we had jobs that were at the range of the earning spectrum that made it a challenge for us to meet our basic needs. That is I don't think that we can ever change that, or would we want to change it? We've got to begin someplace. And let me just go off book there for a little bit and say that in this discussion of the safety net, we have one of the things that we confront is, well, we don't want people to get jobs, just paying the minimum wage. Okay. Well, my argument is, hang on a second. Any job that is moral, legal, and ethical, and the earnings that come with that, create a pathway to freedom. Now, we might not want to stop at that place, but I don't want to denigrate good work that can help us begin our pathway to economic freedom. Now, that's one part of this. Okay, Kevin, the second part of this is because we have had, in our society, such an emphasis towards everybody going to a four-year college. Okay, we have a whole service sector which is begging for really good paying jobs. Really jobs that are begging for labor force. Okay? So maybe one of the things we can do is adjust our model so that we don't have this obsessive drive to this one size fits all. Okay? That we understand that there is good work all across the spectrum. Okay, and then I bring this one home, but I don't think that there is a problem with having to do more to make ends meet for a part of our journey. Okay, this idea of everybody could hold one job and and earn enough to make their way, I don't subscribe to that. Okay, I subscribe to the journey. Okay, and it's a journey that so many of us have been on, where we got a first job, and that first job was it helped us begin to make our way. Now it didn't near provide the earnings that we needed, but we learned from that. We coupled our skills together. We got a better job and a better job and a better job. And what I want to propose in our public support sector is that we look at a job, a better job, and then a career. And that's what we help people bootstrap their way to. So I don't accept your basic premise that we want to create a society where everybody will only need that one job that will let them make their way.
Fair enough. So I'm curious about the title of the book, as I asked you my last two questions, because I'm curious about your perspective on how we move forward in the social service or human services sector so that people can live with both dignity and respect and a sense of honor, because ultimately when you give them assistance, the hope is that you give them, as you said earlier, enough public assistance that they have enough resources to move forward in their own independence, whether it be financially or societally. So I'm curious to ask you about your parting message about the health of our social service or human service sector? And how do you think your legacy will be judged in the work that you do? And how do you want that to be defined, my friend?
Kevin, how I pray that my professional career can be defined as an individual who saw a problem in his chosen profession, understood that problem, and proposed a solution to it. A dear friend and mentor of mine, very early on, I was having a discussion with her, and I said that I was really troubled by the political labels of the day, and I wanted to understand, what label that I should be attached to. And she said, "Young man, don't be so much attached to labels." She said, "What I see in you is a solutionist, someone who sees a problem and tries to solve it." And so I would hope that the legacy of my work would be that he saw this problem and set a course to help solve it. And Kevin, that brings me back to the beginning. That's exactly what I hope my book will do. Arnett has holes in it. I want it to be a fire starter. I want it to enter the public marketplace and for folks to hear from an insider. We don't need more. We need different. Okay? And if this can be the opportunity to start this fire and it creates a groundswell and burns like a blaze so that we do the things that we need to do in government and outside of government to make this system work for everybody, understanding that no matter what their life's journey, every individual is entitled to dignity and respect in their pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so we have a system of public supports that if we will just re-engineer that system, we can help people achieve that objective.
Yeah, absolutely, my friend. And finally, Commissioner, tell me if people want to get connected with the good work that you do and they want to continue this discussion. What's the best way they can reach out to you, my friend?
So of course the book you can find on Amazon, and it is Our Net Has Holes in It. And it is a reference to a childhood circus that I went to and learned about the safety net. So you can find that book on Amazon. We are currently building a website that will take folks on a journey of this work. But I am certainly available through the Tennessee Department of Human Services, operating out of Nashville, Tennessee.
Well, fabulous, my friend. I want to tell you that you're really doing good work to lift up the good people of Tennessee and provide them with hope, dignity, and a sense of prosperity. I really enjoyed our wide-ranging conversation, and I want to thank you for the privilege of engaging in conversation with you and for being here to answer my questions. It's most appreciated, my friend.
Kevin, I let me share my appreciation with you, not only for the opportunity to be introduced to your audience, but also for getting the opportunity to learn just a little bit about you and your life's work. You, to me, are a screaming example of someone who has embraced the challenges of their life and created a journey to allow you to live the life of your choosing. And that is our hope for everyone. And so I want to thank you for being a shining example of that and giving me the opportunity to share with your audience today.